So there's been a lot to talk about when it comes to the Cleveland Browns recently. And like Jake, we were talking about this. I was on your podcast 2 weeks ago. What a difference 2 weeks makes. What a difference 2 wins make, right? This whole thing became a lot easier, a lot more pleasant, a lot more excitement around everybody in the Browns. And now we're sitting here, and with the Browns are at 5-7. I'm not big into the whole we still got playoff hopes thing. I'm just going to take that 1 week at a time at this point, because the time to control our destiny has been put behind us, right? Like that was get to 6 wins to control your own fate. Now we're not at that. But the season is still alive for this team. There are still things that can shake their way. If they beat the Bengals this week, that would be very, very helpful in their goal. But first, let's just get this one through. Is Deshaun Watson, right? He came back, 700-day layoff. Obviously, I kind of mentioned this in my film breakdown. Deshaun Watson's a guy who's going to have all the recipes for an overreaction either way, right? There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of negative attention on him. And there's also a lot of money involved with him. And then there's been a long time to speculate. So I felt like unless he put up something undeniable in that game, it was always going to be looked at more unfavorably. And if he put up like what he did, a mediocre stat line on Sunday, then that's just going to be torn apart. But when you looked at the film, did you see anything there that made you feel like this could head down a Russell Wilson track line?
Yeah, well, we don't want that, right? No, I hope not. I think the thing that works in Deshaun's favor is that he has somebody with him in Stefanski who is clearly willing to mold what Stefanski's offense is in the core to what Deshaun is most comfortable with. Well, that hasn't always been the case with Nathaniel Hackett out in Denver. So there's a small silver lining there. I think all of us have been living in a little bit of our fear about if that Russell Wilson stuff would manifest itself in Cleveland. And listen, I think that the book is far out from Russell Wilson just being completely done. It could just be a bad year, and bad years happen every now and again. So to the greater point here, I think Kevin has shown an ability in just one game. I tried to write on it ahead of time, wrinkles that they could put in for him, and I wrote on the stuff that they actually did. You know, Kevin had run like 6 RPOs in the first 2 years in Cleveland, 3 years calling plays with Minnesota, and they ran 8 RPOs alone in this first game with Deshaun. Read options sprinkled in, a lot of the things that make Deshaun comfortable. And then they did a pretty good job of having him high-low, certain coverages, and like, I'm not discouraged. I thought there's a lot of stuff that probably not many of us gave enough credence to, myself included, where 700 days, it's a long time. It's a long time to not have live action being thrown at you. On top of the 2020 season was a year where there were no fans in the stands. So he hadn't played in front of a raucous environment since 2019. So that's a lot. It's a lot to be like, oh man, this almost feels brand new. Like that's think about where you were in your life in 2019 versus just this past Sunday. That's a lot. So I'm not trying to make excuses for him. This guy's gotten paid handsomely. He's wanted the pressure. He's got to perform, but there are things here. So like when you get with Quincy Avery, his quarterback coach, and when he's doing training camp and he's doing all these other things, remember, he didn't really practice in 2021. He was just a body. He was just out there. They excused him. He wasn't practicing. So he's really only done OTAs. He had mini camp, training camp, all of which, what can you not do, Quincy? Can't touch quarterback. Golden rule, don't touch quarterback in practice. Don't get in his face, let him throw, all that stuff.
Especially the $230 million
Bingo. So you're not really facing angry 270 to 320 Bills guys coming at you, trying to knock you on your butt and deliver footballs into tight coverage of guys trying to earn their paychecks on a Sunday. It's different than what he's been doing for 2 years, where you're in the training facility with Quincy, who's trying to recreate the playbook, and all that stuff is great. Love it. And there's some elements of that has to get better, right? The communication wasn't great on times. Snap count stuff I thought needed to be changed up here and there where the Texans were getting jumps. Deshaun actually did the Cardinal sin as a quarterback and bailed out of a under center because he forgot the snap count. Like you could see all of that there. And on top of all of that, I've been thinking about this first game back for years. It's in Houston. I've been building up 4, 5, 6 months now to this Houston arrival date. You know, when he got the 11 games finalized, he's been thinking about it. And then you want to just perform. You want to do so well, so bad. You could see his mental processing was sped up. His mechanics sped up. That's why the balls were delivered low a lot of times. So to me, none of it is a surprise. Again, and I'm putting this back at myself. I didn't think we gave enough credence to all of the elements around him. And that leads to the performance that we saw. I need to see 6 weeks. I think he'll get better every exposure. His issues in this game came against pressure. He has always been a very good pressure quarterback. And I think as he gets comfortable with the vibe of depth perception of a D lineman rushing him, you and I talked off air a little bit how he has to clean up some of his landmarks in the pocket to help his tackles. That stuff will get better, in my opinion, as he gets more live reps. You just have to see it, feel it, what that looks like when guys are pressuring you and get that throw off, and what do I have this amount of time? How do I feel about making this throw to the opposite hash? Like, he'll get there. I think he'll be fine. There were some things that were very encouraging. A beautiful ball off a wide zone boot play action to Peoples-Jones there. You had a great throw on a third down on a backside dig route that I love seeing a quarterback find a backside dig. He hit Cooper on one. So it will come. There's already added elements and benefits to the run game that we saw. He pulled and carried the ball several times. The RPO stuff's fine. I'm not concerned at all yet. It was a worse game than I anticipated from him. But again, you look at it, step back, remove any bias of either you're a fan of him or not a fan of him, and look at the surrounding elements. Oh, I can see why that would be a performance you would get. But to your point, which is great, he is going to get takes on one side or the other really wide. You know, like I'm sure you thought, like I thought, when he threw the interception, I'm like, that's all over social media. That's all anyone's going to talk about. He spiked that ball when he was trying to pull it back in, and it got returned for a touchdown, got overruled. Like, that's all. I'm see the tweets now. 230 million for this question mark. It's everywhere. He's got to stay off social. He's got to stay focused on what matters. And the same for Browns fans. Like, just let this stuff play out. Like, let it play out, man. Give this guy a window of a year and a half to get comfortable again. And I have a feeling, man, with the people that are in the building guiding this whole thing and how they'll cultivate to what he's good at, it'll work itself out. I don't have a doubt about it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been thinking about is kind of a different adjustment, I think, for even Kevin Stefanski, right? Because you brought it up that there are two types of quarterbacks that you can live with in the league. There are recreators, and then there are creators, right? People who can create things on their own, and then there are guys who can do what the offense tells them to do very well, and they can do that well. Like Kirk Cousins is a good example of somebody who can, if you script it for him, he'll get it right. And when you look at Kevin's quarterback list, right, Kirk Cousins, he's definitely like the quintessential guy we're talking about here when it comes to recreators. When it comes to Baker Mayfield, the one year he was really successful was when he was comfortable accepting that role, and things kind of fell apart once he was not willing to accept that role. And then there's Jacoby Brissett, who, I mean, he's in the league because of his ability to kind of do this. And then we get to Deshaun Watson, who's a little bit of a different story. What adjustments do you think Kevin, as a offensive, he's not the offensive coordinator, but he is for all intents in charge of the offense, him and AVP. What adjustments do you think they're going to have to make long-term and short-term to kind of adjust to having somebody in here who, yes, if what's there is there, like they'll be able to find it, they'll be able to do that, but you also have to leave them room to do the things that make them special.
Sure. I mean, this might be a lame man. I don't think they have to adjust anything. I really don't. Like, I tried to write about the fit the other day. Like, he's so good in empty in his career. I think the empty stuff will be fine. And Kevin loves to run the horizontal stretch, West Coast style empty stuff. I think that stuff will work itself out. I think the ability or the adaptation, if they didn't do any RPO or read option stuff this first game, I would have been concerned. But they were all in right away. And I'm talking not just simple RPO stuff, which is a read and a throw. He's got to do 2-layered RPO stuff, which is read the D end to decide if he's going to give it or not, but then get out. And then when you get out, you got 3 different throw options. Those are unique high-level RPOs. So they were doing those. They ran that read flat wheel stuff 6 times alone. So I think that they're going to give him those. They're going to give him the empty stuff because he's a creator out of empty. If he doesn't like to read, it gives him space to create outside the pocket or run in between the tackles if teams go lighter personnel. But he's also really good at those vertical stretch play action throws from under center. So, like, I think that everything here is really the fit. It's just about fine-tuning how to use them, when to use them, and Deshaun feeling comfortable in them. It'll come. I'm just like, I could be alone here. We could talk about this at the middle of next year and be like, this just ain't clicking, man. It's not working. But everything that Deshaun has been super effective at, RPOs, in terms of like EPA at the top of the list from 2020, RPOs, under center play action were phenomenal, and empty. He was phenomenal. Top 5 EPA quarterback and empty. So, like, these are things that he's good at. He's even good at third down, basic, 3x1s with the running back in the backfield, traditional stuff too. So I don't think they have to do anything outside of what they're doing. They just got to hone it in, get better at it, keep working at it, refine it, and continue to work the things. Because like Deshaun, when he hit the backside dig to Cooper on that third down, I'm like, that's what you want to see. Front side to backside, they have the backside dig open so often, and it's like, that's what I want to see. Can he work it? They just got to protect him a little better. And I do think that he'll get more comfortable with the pressure stuff, and he'll be able to create. They'll give him opportunities to be that special player he is, and they'll give it to him via play action stuff. They'll give it to him via empty, and they'll give it to him via the RPO stuff that he's so gifted at too, because he threatens the run. He threatens the hand it off, the read it right and give it to Nick and Kareem, who are good enough at it. And I was encouraged. The Browns blocked inside zone pretty well for a team that doesn't run inside zone. They blocked it pretty well. The O-line was pretty solid at the 1 yard halo rule, that you can't pass 1 yard downfield for RPO stuff to throw it because it'll get flagged for an illegal man downfield. Thought that was pretty crisp. It's just a matter of hitting a few of them. And I really do think they're going to hit a few of them. You know, Cincinnati plays a different brand of defense than Houston, so we'll see what that looks like ultimately. But I'm encouraged about where they're at with him and what they're doing and putting him in situations that I think traditionally he's been comfortable in as a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think the last thing we'll touch on specifically about Watson, one of the things I felt like was very encouraging was he still had, like, I talk about when I watch Bryce Young, I see a lot of like Deshaun and Bryce Young, where it's like Bryce has that weird ability to go anywhere on the field, orient himself, and not lose track of where everybody else is. Mm-hmm. And he still had that, right? There were a couple throws. I think with Kareem Hunt, he threw one on the sideline where he kind of had to spin out. There was the first play, the first third down of the game, where he kind of got spun out, found David Bell, just didn't have it. Like his mental, the stuff that, like, okay, that's what makes Deshaun Watson special. You saw the flashes of those consistently enough where you're like, okay, he still has that. It's just about physically getting him to a place of comfort so he can make a better throw in those situations. And that's more of an encouraging sign. If it were like, if he got to that first kind of combo sack thing that happens to him and he wasn't able to spin out like he has done consistently his whole career, I would be like a little bit more concerned. But he did the stuff. It's just, he hasn't knocked off the rust to the point to where he can finish the plays like he wants to, which is a different problem and a problem you would prefer in this situation.
Yeah, and I didn't think that they went into that Texans game with a. Now, I'm not saying they withheld plays. They're trying to score points, but I don't think that they wanted to expose too many things that I think they want to do play action wise. The under center play action stuff left a lot of meat on the bone, in my opinion, because the Texans were very zealous up near the line of scrimmage, and I think they knew they could have done that stuff. But they also know we have Baltimore looming and we got Cincy looming, and I want to keep a couple of these vertical stretches in our back pocket when we got up. And I think they went to those things. I think they'll continue to do that. But to your point, he had a nice step up and slide. That ball to Anthony Schwartz was a fun one too. It was a 3x1 read concept where the curl flat defender took the running back swing late, so he steps up and pushes forward toward the line of scrimmage, but has the eyes downfield, flips it to Schwartz, conversion. Schwartz obviously fumbles it. That's unfortunate, but that was encouraging. To your point, some third down throws were encouraging. There was one time, where I thought he created his own pressure, where he ducked his head and created his own pressure, but I only counted one time that he created his own, like, frazzled, I got to put my head down, try to scramble, make a play type of thing, pressure. And that's going to happen. Sometimes guys who are gifted and escape artists are just going to sometimes leave a little bit early, but they do enough good stuff when they leave early that it overshadows a sack here or there, or a poor decision maybe that you didn't see that receiver running a deep crosser or something. So it's not perfect. They paid him. Here's something to remember. They paid him $230 million. Not because he's the league's best quarterback, but because he was the league's only free agent quarterback we've ever seen at their peak powers. They did that to get him. I think there are still things like, just because Watson was paid $230, that's a product of market. It's not a product of if he was, look at his just deal the year before with the Texans. It tells you where he's kind of at in the league. He's a top 5 to 10 quarterback. The Browns had to pay him more to get the services because you don't see these guys hit the mark. Listen, my friend, you know this as well as I. If Lamar really hits free agency this offseason, actually really hits it, he will make
26 years old as a former MVP at quarterback.
He will make 260, 270. He will make, but that doesn't happen. So the situation with Watson was unique. He had leverage that nobody else gets, and the Browns did what they had to get a quarterback that they can get him there. That doesn't mean he's supposed to come in and be better than Patrick Mahomes after taking 700 days off. It's going to be a build-up to get to the point where he was a top 3 quarterback in 2020. They think he can get back there. And when you have a top 3 guy, doesn't mean he's infallible, but it does mean on any given Sunday he can do some things that win you those games. So just a little thing I wanted to try to remind people of with that.
Yeah, and he seems very aware of how his movement affects defenders, right? Like sometimes it might be, I'm in this, it was a 3-step drop, nothing's open quick, so pressure's coming. Let me move before there's actually pressure, just so I can see if one of the safeties will follow me and that'll crease something open for one of my guys downfield. So he's moving back there to make plays downfield most of the time. And he didn't seem eager, right? Like we've seen eager, like Johnny Manziel 2014, that's I need to leave the pocket right now, like, because I don't know what to do anything. I don't know how to do anything else, or I'm not comfortable doing anything else. He wasn't doing that. He was leaving the pocket, like he was going through the play. And then if he felt like he needed to, it didn't look like it was like Malik Willis out there where it's like, oh, he's just running.
Lost.
To run.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. There is a run to create, and then there's a run because this is not for me, right? This is, I cannot see what I need to see. That is exactly right. And he wasn't doing that. I would agree with that.
And that's kind of one of, like, even as a runner, he's really good at cutting against the grain and figuring out, okay, if I move this way. It's kind of like Nick Chubb's vision as well. And I wonder how compatible they're going to be. And it could be like a really interesting thing for those two as they develop together, because they both are kind of cut against the grain vision guys. Yeah. And if they start seeing the same thing, I mean, they get on track. But let's talk about the game coming up, Browns versus Bengals. Browns historically kind of have had a good matchup, right? And I think a lot of that is on the defensive side of the ball. Myles Garrett versus Jonah Williams. He's the new Andrew Villanova for him, right? Where Andrew was Big Andy used to always get ate up by Myles. Now it's Jonah who he's got no answer, right? And it's not really his fault at that. That some of this is just genetics, right? Like there's only so much a dude like Jonah's going to be able to do on a dude like Myles.
Did you especially see what Joe Burrow just said, by the way?
What did he say?
He said he was asked today, do the Browns do something defensively that gives you fits? And his answer was they have Myles Garrett.
I've been telling them for years. It's the problem. We blamed it on Baker Mayfield. We try to blame it on all these other things. Like, it's Myles Garrett. Like every game, there's a Myles Garrett play that changes things for the Bengals. Like there's always that play, and that's the problem, right? 9-5 is there, and that's a problem for the Bengals, right? Because they are also one of those teams that don't really do a lot of things to really protect. Will do a lot of extra things in the protections to help out Jonah Williams when he's left on the island against somebody like Myles. I know the people I know that cover the Bengals, they complain about, hey, like we gotta do something against these elite pass rushers. There's only so much you can do in that system against elite pass rushers when you're not willing to go and put an extra tight end on the line of scrimmage or lose a guy in the pass game. You're just kind of saying, hey, make a play at that point. And that's where you get some variance. That's such a huge thing,
Quincy, that people don't talk about, man. It's like, hey, Myles didn't have an impact on the game. You do understand that if a team game plans their entire process around keeping you from hurting them, that is the definition of impacting the game. Like,
he impacts the game more than any player on the team, and he could not get a single tackle. Like that, 100%. Because everything about, like, it's like with Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb don't need 100 yards to impact the game because the game plan is going to be affected as if Nick Chubb was running for, like, as if a Joe Schmo was running for 200 yards. They're going to make the same adjustments on the first snap for Nick Chubb that they would make in that kind of a game. The game's already been affected by Nick Chubb. Same thing with Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett don't got to get a bunch of sacks to affect the game because everything, like the Ravens are the best example of it. Everything the Ravens do when they play the Browns is with 95 in mind, right? Like that's you check the mic and then you look at where 95 is and then you double check that plan, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
And
on the
keeping that
checklist.
tight end in, keeping a tight end in to chip him takes a fourth receiver out of a concept. It's less people to cover. A back staying to the side. Again, that's not a back releasing into a route concept, thus making it easy. Like people have got to understand that. If you're going to push a guard to Miles' side, you're giving a one-on-one somewhere else. So I know you want his data to always be in the stat sheet, but that's just not how football works. It's a 22-man operation at any given moment, and in dedicating extra bodies of those 11 on the opposing team to stop you, that creates for everybody else. So yeah, I know you harp on it the same way I do, but that just cannot be reiterated enough. That the people, you've got to understand, football is more than just your fantasy rosters. It's not. It's there's elements beyond elements, man. And if you sit in with a real coach and listen to them talk about how they have to do it to get it right, there are 52 elements of a play you don't even know. So it's just it's a lot, man, as you know.
Yeah, and I think the Bengals matchup problem, as you kind of elaborated on, kind of folds in on itself because it's like, okay, not only do you deal with Myles Garrett, not only does that bring in, hey, what are we going to do to chip him? Are we going to lose a couple guys in these route concepts to do that? Then it goes into, well, the less receivers we have out there, the Browns have 3 good corners, right, that they could throw out there. I mean, especially this year, Greg, MJ, and Denzel, they've all been playing pretty well at different points of the year, and I think they played pretty well last week together as a group. So now it's like, okay, you have that to deal with on the back end. So it's not like you're going to get an obvious matchup where you're like, hey, we can find a way to get Jamar Chase on a 33-year-old, I don't know how old Desmond King is, but like a cooked Desmond King, right? Or something like that to kind of free him up. So now it becomes even more complex. And I think that's the big problem that the Bengals have had. I think there are also some issues. I think the Browns offense really knows how to get Jesse Bates to bite a lot. Like Jesse always has bad games against the Browns. And I think because he's very aggressive and he definitely will go wherever the quarterback's eyes are, to kind of his detriment at times. And I think that feeds into it. Do you see any of this changing this week because Watson is there for the Browns?
It shouldn't. I mean, not to say it won't. Not that the Bengals are playing a better brand of football the past 4 or 5 weeks than when Cleveland first saw them. But I mean, as far as I understand, Kevin is, unless I'm missing something here, I believe Kevin's also undefeated against, since he hasn't lost to them either since his arrival in Cleveland. Did they lose to him in 2021? I cannot remember if they lost.
The last time they lost
two.
was 2019 to Brandon Allen. Yeah.
So he's had a pretty good feel for them. He has a pretty good feel for Anarumo. I think it's now you pronounce Lou Anarumo, the DC over in Cincy. He's been there since 2020 with the group they've had in Cincy as well. He has a pretty good feel for how they align, what their defensive keys are that have given them some fits in terms of creating those vertical stretches in the passing game. Think of Odell up the left sideline. Think of Amari making some downfield shot catches against them. They have really struggled. I know that what they did to Cincy in the first matchup was quick counted them. What that means is, everybody's up at the line of scrimmage, and the center it's actually called a touch snap is what we used to call it. Center's the last one up to the line of scrimmage, and he just goes down. Everyone's ready. Center walks up last and just shotgun snaps it right away. That was an effective thing against them the first time. They've done that over the years to Cincy. I'll be interested if Cincinnati's in that mold of being ready for it, but they've also hurt them with the screen game over the years. So I do think they have them pretty schemed up. The Browns defense gives Joe some fits because they really like to funnel, and really what Joe prefers is to push it. He wants to push the thing downfield. Now Jamar is back, and that makes a difference. He's a better quarter, as any quarterback would be with Jamar Chase. So we'll see what that looks like and how the Browns want to defend him. If that's put Denzel on Jamar more or put Martin Emerson on him. I think Martin Emerson needs to kind of shadow T. Higgins in my opinion, but we'll see what that shakes out ultimately looking like. But they have just, the way the Browns play their cover 3, roll to cover 4, or cover 4 is a bit more often than some of the stuff that they see. So both teams at full strength here should be fascinating. I don't think Watson changes anything. Actually, I think Watson creates more wrinkles that Cincy has to prepare for on top of what the Browns traditionally do. But I think you would agree with me. The rule of this one will be, can Cleveland run it? Their run game efficiency has been in the 20s the last 4 weeks. If they can figure out how to run it, and man, if you start leaving safeties deep, creeping safeties up, and to get Deshaun in space off some of these under center run action looks, you're in a real bind. So I think he can add elements to it. I would be very interested, and I will not be surprised if he doesn't play all too well because of the environment and still getting back in the swing of things. But over time, the Burrow-Watson matchup over the next 5 years or so there'll be battles. There'll be battles because both of those guys are pretty good, and I think the Browns are just they're a tough matchup because they're DB centric, linebackers who can move, a deadly defensive end who can wreck a game at any moment, and that's always given them problems. Now, how the Browns handle what the Bengals have done under with Samaje Perine, more of that downhill running from the gun, will be interesting. But I still think Cleveland does match up with them well, and they've looked around the division to match up with a higher volume of DB look structure, some dime. They'll sprinkle in some dime. They'll sprinkle in some big nickel, and I expect them to still make this. I think Cincy being favored is right, but I certainly think it's got the potential to be another really close one.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what goes down there. We want to touch on something real quick before we head out. Defensively, we have seen two good defensive performances, right? I think unobjectively, I think the Buccaneers game was a good performance, right? You held them to 17 points. That lead was at like 7 for a while. They did a really good job. The Texans one, I'm not going to lie. When I watched that game, I wasn't thinking, man, this Browns defense is playing so well. I was thinking, goodness gracious, Kyle Allen might be the worst professional quarterback I've ever seen. Yeah. So I just could not, watching them, I don't know what to take away from the defense the last 2 weeks. Because even then, yes, you held Tampa Bay under 20 points. That's great. But Tampa Bay is under 20 points almost every week. You know what I mean? Like, they have a real problem offensively. So how much of this success were other teams continuing problems that they have had all year, quite frankly, versus the Browns defense actually having an impact on what those teams were able to do?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think this defensive performance against the Texans was, hey man, Kyle Allen stinks, and he missed open throws. He fumbles a football on a sneak. The interception off of a screen pass. I do think the Browns I will give them credit. I think the D tackles the last 2 weeks have been better at stacking and shedding instead of just shooting gaps. They're playing better. I think the run fits as a whole and the rallying to the football has been better. Not that I don't expect Cincinnati to be able to run the ball on them, because there are still times where run fits are missed, and the Browns missed 17 tackles against Dameon Pierce, who is a dog in the open field. He's a tough guy to bring down, but so is Perine. He will run through your face in that same mold, and Joe Mixon out in space can still be dangerous in his own right. So it's not an easy task here, and I don't know that I can't just sit here and tell you, yeah, the running defense is going to figure it out again. I think that two teams didn't run it enough. Tampa didn't run it enough, and Houston didn't run it enough. I have no idea why Houston would ever say, let's drop back Kyle Allen 39 times and let him throw 39 times in a game that was close midway through to late third quarter. It's not like that game was a blowout 30-0 halftime Dolphins score. That game was 14-8 late in the third quarter. So, like, whoever's running the Texans should be fired offensively. That was putrid. And Tampa, Tampa throwing it more, I get, right? You got Julio and you got Mike and you got Godwin and you got Tom. I get it. The urgency to throw it there is real. But how does Cincy manage? Let's challenge the Browns' run defense. Even though we have Joe, Jamar, T, Tyler, how do we challenge them? They have to this is sort of it, Quincy, right? Where they know that most teams, they just want to throw it. So we don't really care that you want, like, if you want to really, really run it and take the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands and hand it to Perine a bunch. Now, the Browns have been so historically bad that some teams have not even cared, right? Like, they've been like the Bills. Yeah, exactly. It's like the Bills spent the whole first quarter of that game being like, all right, we're going to get Josh going. And then we're like, what are we doing? And then they just opened the floodgates and just ran power counter and duo and beat the heck out of them. But, like, That's what I'm curious about. Like the Browns' best run defense is getting out early because you force them to feel like they have to throw and they just don't want to run. So if Cleveland's able to do that, jump out early and force Cincinnati like they did the first matchup to feel like we shouldn't be running because we need to either get back in the game or we just want Joe and T and Jamar to make big plays, that works in the Browns' favor because they're better set up to defend that way. So it's to your point, it's not been that much better defense, and I don't want people being like, Joe Woods saving his job. Man, I don't think so. But I mean, I think you and I talked about that on my pod. Can this guy save his job? Like, I don't want that because that performance last week wasn't great. They just benefited from terrible quarterback play. And to your point, Tampa's just struggling. They're just not able to get on the same pace. Not like Mike Evans wasn't open a few times for some big plays. They had plays they just missed. And Tampa's, been a foot off on almost everything they're doing down there. So it's not like the Browns shut down a unique 40-point a game offense or something. So this game, with the way since he's playing, Burrow's playing better ball now than he has at any point this year. You got Chase healthy. They got this good mix going with P. Ryan. It's going to be a real challenge. Like this is since he's good. They're very good on offense right now. So we'll have a conversation, I'm sure you and I, after this one to see what it looks like, because this is the challenge, in my opinion.
There's like 4 weeks where the Joe Woods mirage could pop up. Like this was definitely the 4 weeks we should have saw coming because Tampa Bay's been bad all year. Texans have been bad all year. For whatever reason, he always has his best performances defensively as a play caller against Cincinnati and Baltimore, right? Like you talk about
no coach is better than job on the line, Joe Woods. Apparently, that's the
job
thing.
on the line versus a division opponent. Joe Woods
Yes.
is something else. You know what I mean?
That's his 2 X factor traits. If you're a Madden guy, that's when his light up under the logo.
It's like when they used to do it in NCAA, but in some games where you have where you're losing by so much, like in a fighting game, you're losing by so much, they give you like one of those pity specials to try to get you back into the game.
Yeah, that's right.
Joe Woods be building up that meter, man. But
I hope that doesn't blind people, but they could put together another good one. They just sometimes, man, and you know this too, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, but they do play Cincy well. I would be pretty surprised if it was a blowout in their favor. I really would. I think that'll be another close game that Cleveland could find a way to win.
Yeah, I think it'd be a close game, and I'm on the camp of, hey man, those 2 back-to-back weeks of tape from the Miami game, and then you can even throw in the New England game, and that Buffalo game. Those are can't come back tapes. You know what I mean? No. Like when you evaluate the season and you look back at those 3 games, you're like, can't come back. Can't come. You can excuse the Atlanta game because Miles and Jadeveon weren't playing, but like you had Miles and Jadeveon all of those 3 games. You know what I mean? Like, you can't come back from those. But
you can't, and like that's what I said to some of our OBR guys today. I can respect a team that doesn't want to pull the rug out from a team mid-season. I get it. I can respect not wanting to, you doing all you can to not fire someone mid-year. But if they decide to keep him again, I can't back up anybody. I can't. Your fate is you deserve the fate that comes with keeping Joe Woods.
At that point, you're gambling on Joe Woods, and 100%. That's on you. But I get not doing, especially this year where you got Deshaun coming in the middle of the season. Like, how much do you really want to switch up in a season where your quarterback's coming back 11 games in the middle of the season, and you have just a bunch of stuff going on? Like, do you really want to change? Do you want to take the risk of, hey, maybe we have to put some offensive guys on the defensive side because we're stretched thin at different position groups? Like, I don't think people considered that enough, and why it probably just was, at the end of the day, too inconvenient to move on in the middle of the year. But as long as he's on the roster, people are going to be worried about keeping him for the next year, and that's where I'm like, okay, the line gets drawn after this season because you can't see what we've seen for 3 straight years and think that like we're gonna bet on this for a 4th. Like that's. I mean,
their
if that's
fate gets tied to him, man. I can't make any excuse for you at that point. I've written articles on how Sean Payton did it 2 years and then he fired his DC after the 3rd year. Like, this is the 3rd year, like, because it helped him got Greg Williams, and then they took, like, I've done everything I can to say Stefanski and Barry should be able to re-pick a DC. I think that everything is there to do it, to try to get another voice, another schematic process in place here. And if they don't do it, You do you. That's your. I can't back it up. I can't make excuses for him at that point.
Yeah, it's just about not deciding to go up that Dorsey Hill, right? Like the famous John Dorsey Hills. When he went on the hill to get Andy Reid fired in Kansas City and died on that hill, and then he died on that Freddie Kitchens hill. You can't be dying on these hills. But I want to thank Jake for coming on. A great football conversation as always. Make sure you check Jake out at Browns OBR. He has the podcast. I believe you do it daily, right? I listen to it at least as much as I get the chance to. It was on my Spotify top podcast list. I don't know if you saw that tweet I put out that. So make sure you guys check it out, especially if you want to know more of the nuts and bolts about how these things work. He's very, very great at explaining those things, especially. And I always like to have him on when it comes time to look under the hood at this Browns team and see what's going on with the engine. But that's it for today's show. You guys have a great day. Have a good night.